The Barbarian Betrayal, chapters 44 and 45. The Power Within. "Come on!" Tychist shouted at his sister, grabbing her arm and yanking her back to her feet as they raced down one of the tunnels. Her response was a burst from her weapon, dropping another machine in mid-leap coming from their rear. Within seconds of escaping from the ambush, the pair had discovered to their dismay they were hopelessly lost, cut off from the rest of the group. All communication with the others had been lost since the ambush, despite their frantic efforts. Going back wasn't an option, the sounds of pursuit disposing them of that notion in a heartbeat. "Where are we?" Chechla panted, as her brother slapped another magazine into his rifle. "I don't know!" he exclaimed, briefly skidding to a halt as they came to a small chamber that sported 3 separate egresses. They stared at the openings in confusion before he turned to his sister. "Which one do we choose?" The sound of metal scraping stone spurred them into action. "This one!" Chechla screamed, grabbing her brother's arm and dragging him off towards the leftmost exit. Boom! The explosion echoed like a thunderclap, coating them with smoke and rock dust as the tunnel collapsed behind them. "That should slow them down," Greybird scowled as he readied another charge. "They'll work their way around us," Musashi predicted, even as Tango scanned the tunnel ahead of them. "Do we look for a way out or head deeper in?" he asked. She'd been asking herself that same question, and didn't much care for the answer. "They've got the exit sealed by now," she growled. "That was their plan all along." "So, down it is," Musashi sighed as he checked his ammo. "If we can get to the power plant, we still have a shot of drawing them off," Tango told them. "At least some of the group will make it out." She shook her head before glancing at the hacker. "How many more of those charges have you got?" "Not enough," he said quietly. "Somehow I always knew it would end like this." "We're not dead yet," she snarled, as they pressed forward once more. "Shit!" Admiral Otsoa cursed, as the machine fleet turned in unison and met her attack. She hadn't expected them to just remain passive in place and absorb her blows, but once again she had a sneaking suspicion this latest reaction of theirs had little to do with her. The timing made no sense for it to be a response to her charge into battle. Had they reacted sooner, they could have blunted her sortie, yet if they'd waited, they might have lured her into an impromptu ambush. Reciprocating her efforts now bought them the worst of both worlds, too late to slow her assault, and far too early if they hoped to turn her flank. Which led Adelaide to suspect it wasn't her efforts the enemy was responding to, but those of General Nassat and Diaksh Jiaj Guyaz. Again. That pair's aptitude for causing trouble knows no bounds, she thought to herself, even as she ordered the shields they'd salvaged further forward to blunt the machine's counterattack. It didn't give her anywhere near the coverage they'd enjoyed with Phalange, but at this point, she'd take every advantage she could beg, borrow, or steal. There was no time for finesse. "This is Admiral Otsoa to all ships of the Allied fleet," she announced over the command frequency. "Target the lead elements of the enemy formation and fire." Konheim missiles and Tetrarchy antimatter projectiles filled the empty space once more as the enemy's energy beams lashed out to meet them. Despite the ferocious power of the machine's weapons, the Allied fleet hammered their formation, blasting holes in the ranks as they began to give ground, though not without cost. Despite the protection of the shields, the beams tore great gouges through the fleet, but Adelaide could feel the momentum begin to shift. Just a little bit longer and... "Admiral!" her tactical officer shouted. "We're getting new readings relayed from the planet! We're seeing a massive buildup of energy and..." The lieutenant froze as the numbers firmed up, his face going white. "And what?" Otsoa demanded. He struggled to meet her gaze. "Admiral, the readings seem to indicate a second fleet getting ready to launch." The news rocked her back on her heels. "Dear God," she whispered. "If that's true..." She stared at the new projections, her mind spinning wildly. If those figures were correct, the one thing they absolutely could not do was let that second fleet off the planet. She had no idea why they had waited until now to spring their trap, but because they had, she had a very narrow window of opportunity, and only one option left to her. "Break off the attack and come about," she ordered. Best possible speed to Zhuge. We have no choice but to prevent that second fleet's launch. Aye, aye, ma'am, the lieutenant acknowledged. At what point do we engage their vessels? Before they ever reach orbit, she said quietly, as the officer gaped at her. But Admiral, our ground forces, he began. Don't you think I know that? She snapped. Our responsibility is to the entire alliance, and if General Nassat and his team can't stop them, then we must. She rose to her feet as the bridge went silent. Under no circumstances do those ships make it off the surface, she ordered, even if we have to shatter the goddamn planet to prevent it. Weapons fire seemed to fill the surrounding tunnels as they raced ahead. How many of the troops they'd brought underground were still alive was anyone's guess. But if there was any silver lining at all to be found in this disaster, it was that splitting up their forces had obliged the enemy to do the same. They still held a massive numerical advantage, but if they could just keep moving, stay one step ahead. There! Giaz shouted, pointing at massive set of doors. That must be it! The trio plunged forward, bolting for the entrance, even as Whisper slapped a breaching charge on the locking mechanism and dove for cover, with Nassat and the Diaksh a split second behind him. The ordnance detonated with a thundering crack, sending large chunks of the portal crashing to the ground, not to mention parts of the surrounding wall and ceiling. Not bothering to rest on their laurels, they charged into the structure through the smoke and falling debris, only to come face to face with an enemy squad of machines blocking their path. That the Konhim had 4 upper limbs had its advantages when it came to weapons, as Giaz pumped round after round from his heavy rifle, while also firing his sidearm with one of his free hands, helped keep the enemy at bay. Even as the madman Whisper leapt into the middle of their defensive line, his axe flashing in the dim light. Nassat had lost his own slug thrower somewhere during the mad dash to escape, but he held his auto pistol, a twin to the ones Tango routinely carried, in both hands, firing one deliberate round after another into the enemy ranks. The machines never stood a chance. Between their surprise appearance, the disorientation caused by the explosion, and the sheer ferocity of their attack, they smashed their way through the enemy like so many pins. One moment they faced a dozen enemy machines, and the next, broken metal chassis lay strewn about their feet. The triad struggled to catch their breaths. None of them were exactly young anymore, even as they searched their surroundings for new targets. Nothing, the Saurator finally pronounced in between gasps. For the moment, the Konhim leader said grimly before facing the lone human. Are you certain this is it? He demanded. Oh yeah, Whisper grinned, resting his axe on his shoulder. I've been on enough of these excursions to recognize a power plant when I see one. Then we must disable it quickly, Nassat pronounced, before the machines reinforce. Giaz let his eyes wander about the massive interior. Easier said than done, I suspect. Whisper just threw back his head and laughed. Trust me, there's always at least one key component to something like this. You take that out and boom, he chortled. How will we find it? Nassat asked. None of us are engineers. Oh, that's easy, the madman grinned, lifting his axe from his shoulder and using it as a pointer. Just follow the conduits. They'll always lead you to where they keep their good stuff. The other two shared a brief glance before shrugging in unison. Then let us end this, the Diaksh announced, as they scurried deeper inside the complex. Giaz found himself struggling to catch his breath once again as they arrived at the heart of the power plant. Nassat was handling the forced run they'd made much better, one of the benefits of being a quadruped, while Whisper had the freakish human physiology in his favor and was barely winded. The trio studied the complex mass of piping, conduits, and humming plasma runs before looking to one another in confusion. How do we destroy it? Nassat asked. The Diaksh checked his ammo pouches and grimaced. Certainly not with what I am carrying, he said sourly, as both turned their attention to the third member of their party. Can you disable it? The Konhim leader asked. The human grinned as he examined the complicated machinery. Of course I can, he smirked, but you're not going to like it. Considering I have cared for almost nothing since I first put on this uniform, I would be shocked if it were otherwise. Nasat sighed. What must we do? Whisper shrugged. Here's the thing. I'm no expert, but one thing I do know is that we don't have enough explosives to do it the right way, so we'll have to do it the hard way. He dumped his ruck and started fishing through it. I'm pretty sure I can create a cascade failure to take this place down, but there's a catch. There is always a catch, Giage grumbled. The catch is that it'll take time to make this work, he told them. Time the machines can use to keep it from going critical. He found what he'd been searching for in his ruck, explosives and detonators, and began fashioning a bomb. And once the cascade starts, every machine in these tunnels will be on our doorstep, just begging to get in. He began to whistle as he assembled the device, as the other two stared at one another. And just how are we to get out? The Konhim leader finally demanded. The cascade will come in waves, Whisper explained, grinning as he attached the fuse. Once the last wave hits before it blows, they can't stop it. That's our cue to make for the exits. Nasat blinked. And just how long is that? He inquired. Whisper laughed as he planted the bomb and set the timer. Nowhere near as much time as you'd like, he grinned, picking up his axe. He turned and headed back the way they'd come. You may want to move, the human suggested, sending the other two scurrying behind him. Tychist and Chechla came skidding to a halt as they hit the tunnel's end. It wasn't the first wrong turn they'd made, but as the pair turned themselves back around and began to retrace their steps, they could hear the sound of metal on metal coming towards them, the sound of pursuit that had kept them running non-stop since the ambush. How far back was the last detour? Chechla cried out as they ran for their lives. Her brother racked his brain, struggling to remember before howling, I don't know. However far it was, the sound of the machines drawing near brought them both up short. There was no way they could make it in time. Under anything resembling normal circumstances, they would have gladly entertained surrender, but that did not come close to describing their current situation. With their line of egress cut off and capitulation a surefire route to certain demise, the twins prepared themselves as best they could for the only option left to them. They took positions on opposite sides of the tunnel and hunkered down, readying their weapons in anticipation. They did not have to wait long. At the first sign of movement, the pair opened fire, briefly driving back the closest machines, but it was a short-lived victory at best. The enemy had numbers and time on their side, and the young Soratar's ammunition would not last forever. Chechla swapped magazines, certain in the knowledge death was mere moments away, when a low rumbling sound seemed to suddenly reverberate in every direction. It was felt more than heard, and a heartbeat later their pursuers seemed to simply melt away. Wide-eyed, she turned to her brother. What was that? She asked in astonishment. His expression was just as dumbfounded as hers, but as he realized just how serendipitous the unexplained phenomena was, he staggered over to her side and tugged at her arm. Our chance for escape! He shouted, pulling her behind him as they sought a way back to the surface. Musashi lay down a base of fire as Tango and Greybird covered their flanks. They'd managed to close the distance between them and the power plant, but a wall of resistance seemed to materialize out of nowhere, stopping them in their tracks. We need to fall back and skirt around behind them, Tango yelled to the others, her pistols firing as she looked for a way to do just that. Greybird lobbed a grenade into a tunnel entrance, putting a few well-placed rounds into the machines that tumbled out behind the blast. There! He shouted, already up and moving with the other two right on his heels. Despite their age, the trio moved like clockwork, their years of fighting at each other's side paying them much-needed dividends now. Any hopes for an accurate map of the tunnels disappeared the moment the machines launched their ambush, but they had a ballpark idea of their objectives' direction and distance. Actually getting there was proving to be a problem, but if they could just find a way through the enemy ranks, there was a chance. A heavy thrum reverberated through the narrow corridor, rattling the specialists down their very bones. Their charge came to an abrupt halt as they stared at one another in confusion. What the fuck was that? Musashi demanded. Greybird checked HUD display and blanched. Oh, hell, he managed to get out. What? Tango quizzed him, taking a moment to reload. Someone's triggered a cascade failure at the power plant, he told them. That sound was the feedback loop kicking off. The three teammates stared at each other before rolling their eyes in unison. Whisper, Tango sighed, voicing the opinion they all shared. Explains why he's not with us, Musashi agreed, before suddenly looking around. I'm not complaining, but where did all the machines go? Tango slowly shook her head. They're all falling back to the power plant to stop the cascade failure. What else? She snarled. There's no way we'll get through now. Then what the hell are we supposed to do now? Greybird fired back. We just going to cut and run? She considered that for a moment, then gave them a feral grin. Hell no. We give them something else to chase. Come on, she snapped, waving them towards a side corridor. We got a plan here? Musashi inquired. Yeah, a whole bunch of carelessly unguarded ships, Tango smirked. They paused for a moment, and then began chuckling with evil intent as they disappeared down the tunnel. Admiral Otsoa gripped the armrests of her chair tightly as she watched the machine fleet finally realize what she was up to. One would think the Masters, or whatever the hell they were, would be at least as fast on their feet as the Ronin, but it seemed as if they were consistently a half step behind. Not that she was complaining. Maybe it's their machine minds, their rigid mental architecture, she mused. Humans had long been known for unpredictability, and if the enemy had no experience with their fickle nature, that was something she could exploit. She simply had no idea how. If Nasat and his team could deal with the threat on the surface, she could turn back and finish off the spaceborne threat. But considering the size of his detachment, how lightly armed they were, the loss of communication once they were beyond the barrier, it appeared to be little more than a forlorn hope. She couldn't gamble the alliance on that. Too much was at stake. Admiral, her lieutenant shouted suddenly, we're picking up some abnormal readings from the planet. I'd ask what the hell normal is around here, she retorted, all but biting his head off, before reluctantly dialing it back. What readings? She asked somewhat more civilly. Some sort of strange power fluctuations, ma'am, he continued. If he was miffed, he hit it well. They seemed to be increasing in strength, and we're beginning to see the effects planet-wide. Adelaide stared in confusion. But what would cause... she began, before a slasher smile appeared on her face. Perhaps she'd been too hasty in dismissing the good general's efforts after all. But that still left her with the machine fleet on her heels. She'd give him every possible second she could, but Otsoa had to shake her pursuers somehow. With her diving on the planet, how could she? In a flash, she had the answer. This is Admiral Otsoa to all vessels, she ordered. Batten down the hatches. We're making a slight detour.